Hi, my name is Carrie Davis. I grew up in care since I was 2 years old. Eventually, I was placed in permanent care in a group home called 16 Klondike. Since becoming independent from the group home, I have moved around a few times, and I am now a resident of British Columbia, and I am going to school at Vancouver Island University for digital media. During my spring break, I went to visit Annette King, who is the child and youth advocate for the Yukon. She's known me since I was very young. She's been around a very long time. And we were talking about a review because there were allegations against some group home workers about some abuse that was happening to youth who were living in the group homes. There was also a whistleblower, somebody who worked at the group homes who backed up these claims, and because of this, Annette was asked to do a review on the system. And the part that interested me the most was about aging out, because I had also aged out, and from the sounds of it, not a whole lot has changed. So for my story, I was very institutionalized since I was 2 years old. That's all I've really known was government care, and you usually move out when you're 18, but you can ask for an extension until you're 19 years old. So I did. I asked for an extension. And at 16 Klondike, they built a suite for people who are moving out. So it was supposed to be a transitioning suite. And I was the first one to live down there. There was no supervision. I got away with a lot that I'm not going to say on video. And this had a stove and a fridge and a couch and a TV and a room and a bathroom, obviously, everything that somebody would need to move out on their own. However, this wasn't really functional because while they gave me all of these things, they didn't teach me how to cook or how to budget or how to shop for food. I had one staff member, Spencer Rich, who he kind of taught me how to budget. He was an accountant before he was a group home worker, so at least I got some help on that front. But if he hadn't worked there, I wouldn't know how to budget. And then when it came time for me to move out, they made sure that I had a place to go, and that was at the Contiki Apartments, so right across the street from 16 Klondike. So I didn't move very far. And they just put my stuff in a pile and told me that I needed to pack it up because people were going to come the next day and pick it up, and I was going to move across the street. And my house was really messy, and I think they just did that because I was kind of a mess as a kid, and I don't think they wanted to clean it up. But someone once told me that when your room is messy or your space is messy, then that's usually a reflection of what's going on in your head. And I was definitely very depressed, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was scared, and I tried to commit suicide because I was not ready to move out. So I took a bottle of Tylenol, and eventually I just vomited it up. And they didn't have to induce vomiting because I already vomited. And then they made me eat charcoal is what they did, so that there wouldn't be any liver damage. And then I moved out the next day into Contiki Apartments, which were quite nice. They were a lot nicer than some people get. Some people get the Skylines or something, and those are just, they should be condemned. They should have been condemned 12 years ago, and they still should be condemned today. I don't think a lot of people like to talk about the hard part about moving out of the group homes and how institutionalized kids can get and how reliant they can get on a system. And I was talking to Annette, and it sounds like not a whole lot has changed. Even with the new changes that the government is responsible till you're 24, it sounds like youth still aren't getting the support that they need. They still aren't being taught how to cook or how to budget. And I don't know if they're getting the right mental health that they need. I don't think they're getting the education that they need. So that's why we're making this video. This is to share the voice of youth and to promote meaningful change.
So I am walking through the Vancouver International Airport at 5:30 a.m. Isn't that beautiful? I was wondering why the flight was so cheap. Apparently, not a lot of people want to get up at 5:30 a.m., but it was a full flight, and it was a good flight, and it was a safe flight. And the one bonus about waking up that early is that we got to see the sunset on takeoff, so I'll put that in the video. I'm going to Whitehorse to make a video with SHICAT, the Youth Advocacy Society, and, of course, the Youth Advocate Office. This is to help with a review or a systematic review of the group homes. I'm going to be interviewing a lot of people, hopefully some youth, the Chief of Coleman Dunn maybe, Chief Bill. I'm pretty excited for that. She used to be a journalist. I'm not sure what else to say.
Annette King is the Child and Youth Advocate for the Yukon. She sat down with me to discuss the issues at hand.
I'm Annette King. I'm the Child and Youth Advocate for the Yukon Territory. And what that means is we provide advocacy services for children and youth in Yukon government services. So we promote the voice and rights of young people in the systems, and we really help young people speak for themselves in trying to advocate for what they're entitled to in government systems. Children have a right to be raised by their parents, unless it's not safe. And if they can't be raised by their parents, then they should be raised by their families. And sometimes those options aren't available for children and youth, so they end up in government care. So then the government takes on the responsibility of the parent. And all of the responsibilities that we would think of as parental responsibilities are then done by institutions. So you have a government caseworker as well as a care provider, which might be a foster home or a group home. And it's therefore the responsibility of those care providers to prepare a young person for adulthood. We've seen in the Child and Youth Advocate Office over the 8 years of its operation that aging out of care has consistently been an issue for youth leaving the system. Some of the things that we've seen for children and youth aging out of care have been not knowing where to go for services, not knowing what services are available, and those services can be anywhere from counseling services to how to pay a bill, going to school. We are seeing young people living in poverty in tiny little apartments that we wouldn't want to visit. We are seeing young people having a hard time maintaining employment. Many times, young people leaving care don't have a grade 12 education, and then we're expecting them to go out and find a job, or they might be provided with some financial assistance, so we're preparing them to be on social assistance. There's an institutionalization that can happen for some people in care. And, it's really challenging for someone who's in a group home system with lots of people around, staffed, checked on at night, and then all of a sudden they're alone in an apartment that's not very safe and the noises aren't familiar. One adult said to me that the group home system prepared them for jail. They said they graduated from the group home to WCC. And that's not a sign of successful parenting and preparing our young people for adulthood. Another issue we see for children and youth aging out of care is that sometimes we have young people who get pregnant, and then they're very concerned that their child will end up in care because they were in care. And I also think a measure of successful parenting of our young people is for them to be able to raise their own children when they get older. So what is aging out? When children and youth come into care, they can be in care until their 19th birthday. at their 19th birthday, they're no longer the responsibility of the government. But it is the government's responsibility to prepare for this transition time by doing a transitional case plan with the youth. And those case plans are supposed to happen in the context of a family or cooperative planning processes, not just a piece of paper done and handed to a youth. In 2014, the Auditor General did a review of Family and Children's Services, and one of their findings was that transition out of care plans were not being completed for youth. But one of the things that needs to happen is engaging the youth in the decisions that are happening for the youth. You know, nobody's ready to leave home at 19, but most of these kids just want out of care too. So there needs to be some way where they can leave the care system with the supports that they need. Youth have a right to participate in the decisions being made right from the time that they come into care, right before they even come into care. Young people have something to say. And, you know, youth from care have experienced maltreatment before coming into care and often in care. So with this complex issue, I think we need to start with engaging young people in the decisions that are being made about them. I don't like hearing that children turn 19 and are told, here's the door, you're no longer in care. The transition out of care plans need to happen much sooner and cooperatively with the child and their family and their community. And, you know, young people know what they need, but they need a relationship to be able to express themselves. Two things happen. One is that they don't trust their social worker or the people caring for them, so they don't want to engage with them. And then they're being labeled as resistant. The other thing that happens is they do trust their social worker or the caregivers, and they've seen them as important people in their lives, and now they're feeling completely abandoned by that system because they're no longer there for them. So, you know, these young people have experienced the trauma, maltreatment prior to coming into care, in care, and we don't want to trigger those abandonment issues for young people as we expect them to move into adulthood. The successes that I've seen with kids aging out of care has been when formal supports maintain in an informal capacity, such as when young people stay in the foster home and maybe in a room and board situation instead of foster care anymore, or when they call their group home for a ride, or when they have gatherings for Thanksgiving at the old group home and people come back together. You know, I've talked to some young people that still call up some of their group home workers and just to connect, because those are the people that raised them, right? And, you know, I'd like to see more of those informal supports for children and youth while they're in care so that they're not relying on an institution to continue to raise them. This video, doing this project, is a great way to promote the voice of young people and to create some policy change that can make a meaningful difference for children and youth. I think that when we promote our recommendations with the voice of young people and the faces of young people who have been through it in this form of a video, we really do have much more opportunity to promote meaningful change. And so that the recommendations aren't just in a heavy text report. This is something that we can highlight on our website, bring to meetings, put on a PowerPoint presentation, have on social media. And, you know, the young people know what they need and they're telling us. So now it's the obligation of the people that can make the decisions to listen.
Hearing the voices of young people was the mission, and the Child and Youth Advocate Office and I thought it would be a great idea to host a gathering. Zastine, who is also known as Yvonne Jack, allowed us to use her property, which she calls Zastine's Healing Journey, to hold the event. We were able to gather 2 interviews. The first was Matthew Prophet, a young man who had gone through the system himself.
I don't think the transition is as smooth as they promised. I was just in care for a relatively short time when I was 16 until I was 18, but they promised they would take me shopping and maintain a lot more contact, and they did no aftercare, and I had a really rough transition. I know there's like an investigation or a review on the group home, so I'm just hoping something comes good of that, because I know one of the youth who was in an interview with CBC, and I'm starting to think there's more than meets the eye. It's not all the youth's fault. Just trying to get to the bottom line of why this is happening, especially to the First Nations youth, like why it's in the paper so much. Maybe Pauline Frost could give some answers. I mean, they're locking kids out of home in the wintertime. Like, that's not really right. That's supposed to be their home. They should feel a safe environment regardless on how they're acting. Hopefully their social workers can follow up with them more. I mean, there's not really too many group homes around here, so they don't really have much of a choice but to go back. But if they could just fix the problem and not try to blame it on the youth.
Matthew had personal experience of conflict with staff members.
They would call the cops a lot on me when I was having bad days or I was getting mad. I wasn't necessarily being violent, but yeah, it just seemed like their go-to mechanism. Or they didn't have enough staff sometimes.
He did have some solutions to the problems identified.
Maybe trying to talk to them and not be so vulgar, or, not always put them in restraints, not call the police, just work with them more. Yeah, they need to incorporate more First Nation stuff in the group homes. Like culture camp or like an elder come, or even offering them to smudge or going somewhere to smudge.
The hole puncher.
While the crew learned how to make medicine bags, Bernadette Richard opened up about her experience on aging out.
Aging out of care for me was, I didn't really focus much on it because, like in regards to like even social workers and stuff, they were kind of like out of the picture already for me. And so, by the time I did age out of care, there wasn't really anyone there for me for support from them. It was just my foster family. No help from the government at all. Like, they did promise me certain things, like for my future education, that they would help support me, like until at least I was like 24 or so. And as soon as they aged out of care, they kind of stopped talking to me completely. And so it was kind of up to me and the help of my foster mom to like kind of get like funding and things like that so I could go to university to get my education. But yeah, there wasn't very much support from the government once I aged out.
Bernadette spoke on what could have made aging out better for her.
I think if I actually got to talk to someone like a social worker or something about the process of aging, like what it was, and how the fact that I wouldn't get any support from them, or even the possibility of just having someone like talk to me and be like, is there help you need? It's like, because I could have been in a foster home where my parents could have just like kicked me out and I wouldn't have had any support, which does unfortunately happen to a lot of young adults who do age out. And I guess one important thing for me was like especially having a voice and being able to talk about just my experience with the social care system, because they really let me down. Sorry. Being in foster care, it wasn't always a good experience for me, because especially when I was younger, I was put into homes that were abusive, and as a child you expect someone to protect you, and I never had that until I moved in with my foster mom now, who she took care of me, she protected me, she allowed me to be a kid again, because I was moved around to foster care homes with my other two siblings, and I was pretty much like the mom figure to them, so I didn't really get a childhood until later on, and even then I didn't really know how to anymore, because it was just such a long time where I had to be an adult and take care of myself. And there were so many times where when I talked to my social worker about things going on, everything was just kind of pushed under the rug and ignored. And whereas instead of that, it really should have been like put out there and every kid they should feel safe in their environment, and that's not how I felt when I was little. I never felt safe to speak about my feelings. I grew up, I was taught not to talk just in general about anything, and I wasn't a very happy child because of that. And I had a lot of people in my life after that just saying, why are you such an unhappy person? And just, I was angry a lot of the time. And even now, trying to, assess my emotions and trying to figure out how to, deal with things, I tend to, react more with anger, which is something that I don't really like, because I don't like being angry. But that's how I grew up learning how to deal with stuff, was just to shut everything out and be mad at everything. And I didn't really deal with stuff from when I was a childhood just because it was so traumatic for me that I just tried to forget about it. There's been points where I've talked to people about things that have gone on in my life and it's never really done any good. And so my hope is that it will help change for future kids going into foster care and stuff, that maybe they'll get more support and someone will actually listen to them. It doesn't matter what age they are. If I work with kids because I'm a teacher, and so I knew that if a 5-year-old was telling me something is wrong, something is going to be wrong, and they're not just telling me lies and stuff. There's a lot that I would want to say to say about the system, how it really failed me. And how these rights that they promised for kids were never fulfilled for me. And they promise that they're going to protect you and they're going to get you education and make sure that someone's always constantly checking in on you in your homes, and none of that was ever done for me. And it was almost like I was forgotten. And it was really hard for me because I used to talk to my mom all the time about things going on and how my sister was really the rebel of the house, and so she would get in trouble and stuff, and we'd hear about it all the time, and how the social workers would get involved. And because I didn't get into trouble or anything, and I was always I went to school and got good grades, I was just kind of ignored. And some people would probably think that's a good thing because then they don't have to deal with those social workers, but at the same time, because they kind of just ignored me and pretended I wasn't there, then they didn't have to deal with any of my problems. Because of everything that happened when I was a kid, I developed anxiety, and I have to take medication for it because sometimes it just gets too much that I don't even want to get out of bed the next day just because I don't feel like there's a point. But I just wish that the system was a lot better and not just finding homes for kids, but finding good homes. Or even before that, the options of relatives and or finding some place where they can still make a connection to their culture, because I grew up in all non-First Nations homes, and so I never really got to make a connection to my culture, and that was a part for me that always felt like it was missing. I think that's like a really important thing for people, to just be connected to their home.
It was time to visit Chief Bill at Quanlan Dunn to get her thoughts on aging out of care.
Aging out of care can be terrifying because it's the uncertainty around it all. You don't know where you're going to live. You don't know what your future is, especially if you don't have a job. You're not set for living on your own, and it's terrifying if you don't have the proper supports in place, and you don't have, and when I talk about supports, it's also that personal supports. Somebody that you can go to and talk to and get advice from. It can be a scary thing, living on your own, and especially if you haven't grown up with parents, because you don't have that stability. You weren't raised with those values and stability in mind. All those things can be very terrifying for young people. I actually left on my own at an earlier age. So my circumstances were a bit different than most, but I do, there was a lot of other foster kids that I was with that, aged out of care. And I think when young kids age out of care and they don't have a family that they can fall back on, or they don't have anybody that they can fall back on and get advice from, that it's incredibly important that there be supports there. Before kids age out of care, they should have the financial management skills, like how to balance your bank account, for instance, how to budget, all of those kinds of things, those kinds of skills they should have. When I aged out of care, those things weren't there. You didn't have like even a child advocate office. You didn't have anything like that. There was nobody that you could go to for advice. And when that happens, if a kid's age out of care at a young age with no supports, you're more vulnerable to a lot of things that are out there. In this day and age, it would be even more dangerous because we have the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue. You have other human trafficking, like those kinds of stuff. So nowadays, I think it's really, it's extremely important that those kinds of supports be put in place, and especially for young kids who don't have anyone to go to. Aging out of care is it's, for me, it's been a concern for me, and I've spoken about it publicly. Because we have, like in Quanlan, we have kids who have aged out of care in the past, and they ended up on the streets or couch surfing. And that's not a good situation for anybody to be in. So part of my work has been to ensure that that doesn't happen anymore. I know Yukon government has moved to try and put in place supports for children who are aging out of care, which is great. I'm glad to see that. And I want to see that work continue. Here in Quanlan, we'd like to we've developed a concept that I've talked about called Auntie's House. And when kids age out of care, that house will be there to help and support them and to help them transition out of care.
Since Chief Bill had been in care also, I was curious about what has changed since then.
Oh my God. Well, I was in government care in the Northwest Territories. I was taken to Inuvik at a very young age and left in the hostels there. And I kind of grew up in nowadays we call them residential schools, but back then we called them hostels. I grew up in the hostels, in the receiving homes, in the group homes, and in the foster homes. I actually don't, I can't recall how many homes I was in, because in some of them I was in them at least 2-3 times, going in and out. And for growing up in Inuvik in them days, it was different for me because I didn't know I was actually from the Yukon. I wasn't raised with that knowledge, and I wasn't raised with the knowledge of who I was as an Indigenous person. I was raised with Inuits and Dene people, and, I really kind of assumed that maybe I was one of them. I wasn't sure, but I didn't have I didn't know I was from the Yukon until later on in my life, and I didn't really know I had a family until I was about maybe 12 or 13, and I received a letter from my sister. And when I opened that letter, I'd never had a letter before, which was kind of interesting. And I opened the letter, I was so excited, and a picture dropped out. And I picked it up and looked at it, and I was with some friends, and they looked at it, and they said, "Oh, when did you get that taken?" I said, "That's not me." And it was a picture of my sister who looked exactly like me. And that's when I started to ask questions and discovered that I actually had a family. I had 4 brothers and 3 other sisters that I wasn't aware of, and I was shocked that I had such a big family. And eventually, when I actually left on my own, I took off from Inuvik and ended up in the Yukon, in Whitehorse. And that's when I started to meet my family and my relatives and realized this was where I was from. And so for me, what's changed since then? I think, I grew up in a system that was very back then there were no supports. There was no child advocate office. There was no, there wasn't as much concern about the kids going through the system at the time. And I think nowadays there are more kids in care. And there's more of an awareness around what foster kids are going through, and what kinds of supports they need, and what we should be providing them when they do age out of a system. And it's part of I think my personal goal has been to raise that awareness about foster kids, and that they need these things. It's important that they have these things, and being in foster care is tough enough as it is, and to have to worry about things that are happening to you it just adds to the uncertainty and the way they are feeling.
Since she has been an advocate for youth in care, I was interested in what she would say about the review.
I hope it sends a message to people that, change is needed. I don't know when the last time the system underwent a major review, but I think we need to really re-examine the way we deal with kids in care. And for kids in care, I think they need to know that when they bring their issues forward, that they're going to be dealt with, that they're going to be taken seriously. And I think the kids need a voice. They need a voice, and we need to hear them. And I think, the way to do that is likely through the Child Advocate Office. We'll have to wait and hear what the review says, but I'd like to see the child, if that's the case, if that happens, I'd like to see the Child Advocate Office be given the authority to deal with the complaints that do come forward. Right now, I believe, when they do bring these issues forward, they can be seen as recommendations once they go through the system, which means that they don't have to they don't have to deal with those recommendations. They can just, move on from that. But I'd like to see that their issues be dealt with when they're brought forward. I just hope it results in some substantial change for young people in care. And good change, good positive change. Give them the supports that are needed. Put in place the things that will help them make that transition easier for them. One of the things that I think is extremely important for young people aging out of care to have is a home. A lot of kids in care, you're shuffled from home to home. It's that stability that you don't have. So when you age out of care, it's a terrifying thing in the first place. So give them a home, give them a chance, give them that stability, help them put in place those supports. With a home, that's a start. That's a huge start. It's something I didn't get. And it's something that to this day, in my personality and in my character traits that I'm missing, I've noticed especially in my personal life. In my professional life, I've managed pretty good. Yeah, I've managed pretty well. But in my personal life, there are certain things that I noticed that I didn't have. And that's affected me later on, and it's that stability. It's having parents. There's things that I see with young people who were raised with a mother and father, with both parents. I see the traits in them are different from people who haven't been grown up with parents, and that's what I see as the most important thing. Give them a home, something they've never had, and something that I think that, I think most foster kids would cherish. I think my message to kids in care is that, I hope things will get better, and that if you do have issues and concerns, come forward and talk about them, because that's the only way the system's going to change. We need to know and understand what the issues and the problems are if we're going to work for change, and I'm committed to making that change.
Back at the Advocate's office, I interviewed Linda Silverfox, who had a similar experience to Chief Bill.
So I was in permanent care till I was 18, but I would say that I feel like the government gave up on me because I kept on running away. I was running away since I was like 5 years old, and I kept running and running. And when I was about 14, I felt like that's when I made a decision for myself that I was going to direct my own life. And I was tired of being told what to do, where to be, how to dress, and blah, blah, blah. And I just decided that that wasn't what I wanted anymore, and I wanted to live my life and get to know my family. And so they basically just provided me with PO. I don't even know if it was PO back then or what it was, but they provided me for food. And at one point, they provided me with shelter, and I was staying at 4th Avenue Residence, which there used to be clusters. So you lived with other youth or adults. Wasn't the greatest place, but yeah, I kind of just took myself out of care. I've been working in the field for many, many years, since the early 90s. And I've seen little changes. I don't know in specific to children aging out of care, because I haven't so much worked in that field. But I do know, like, when I think about things that I couldn't do when I was in care, like at that time, you weren't allowed to visit your parents. So today I see kids have a bit more opportunity, I think, to connect with their families, which is good. And also get in touch with their culture, if that's what they choose to do, or their foster parents support that, or their group home, or whoever it is, to take them out to events and different things like that. So I think that's good. One of the things that's changed a little bit is that not as many children are going into care. I was part of that 60s scoop when they just came in and took all the children, and I'm the youngest in my family, and I went into care before I was 4 years old, and all my siblings went to residential school. So that whole intergenerational trauma that the government has caused a lot of pain and grief in our family. And, if at all possible, that the government really needs to explore other alternatives to keep families together. Because when you split families apart, you break down their culture, you break down the language, you break down the bond and attachment they have to their parents and their family. And we really lose, well, for myself, I guess I have to speak for myself, that I really felt like I wasn't worth a lot. I felt devalued, and it took me a long time to overcome that. And so I think where at all possible, they need to explore other alternatives, like extended care or, being in their community or with their First Nation. And I understand there are times when children can't remain with their families. I do understand that. There are circumstances. But try as hard as you can to build those supports into that family to keep the family together.
I asked her why she wanted to work with the Advocate's office.
So the reason I wanted to work with the Child Youth Advocate office is because I understood it was a place where children and youth could go to have their voice heard. If they had concerns or issues, that there would be somebody there to help them. And that's something that really drew me to be here, because that's something I've always wanted to do, was to be able to help children. And also as a systemic analyst, that I have the opportunity to make change within the system.
I took a trip to my past and visited the group home that I was raised in, 16 Klondike, to interview Lonnie Borgford, who used to be a regular staff member when I resided there.
I currently am a supervisor of an adolescent girls group home. It's a 6-bed facility for kids that are 13 to 19 years old. I've been working here for 15 years, and my role is to support kids into the home and to provide care throughout the time in the home, as well as supporting them into the community on a transitional basis. Typically, kids prepare for transition between 16 to 18. So based on the kid's ability to be able to live on their own, or based on the assessments we do, we gauge that with them. And so we provide the supports to get them a suitable placement in the community, and provide them support while they're in the community. And that could be looking for jobs, helping them to negotiate the things that they would have to learn. And that's examples of that would be to find a job, to grocery shop, to go to college in some cases, to be able to make a bank account. And so we provide staffing support in the community when that's happening.
I asked Lonnie if there were any problems with the system for aging out of care.
There's absolutely a gap in service right now, and that is that the kids that live in the homes, they depend greatly on the staff that work with them, and we currently don't have a transition home for kids that are aging out of care, and so what ends up happening is we support kids to move into the community, and we do the best we can to provide supports to them with staffing. However, that's very difficult to do without having a home to be able to work out of. I think we do a great job based on what we can do, and it's meeting with the kids, developing plans with them. However, it makes it difficult when you don't have another home that you can work out of, and so providing care not only until 19, which is the age majority, but beyond that, we found that kids require support like anybody else would, any kid would, beyond 19 and up until 30. We have kids that we still depend a great deal on us and come back to the group home even after we've provided support to them. We currently do aftercare for 6 months to a year with kids, and that's more formal, and that's with a plan. However, it makes it difficult because there's always kids in the group home that also require support. And so when a kid is outside the home, you're not there all the time with them. You can't you can't problem solve with them. You have to rely a lot on either setting up meetings to connect with them or having them reach out to you if they're struggling. One of the gaps we have in addition to that is that we don't have a formal process for them to be able to give feedback to us. I mean, we certainly ask for feedback. We have progress meetings with the kids, and then a discharge meeting at the end of their aftercare supports. But we don't have an exit interview that would be really ideal, I think, for them to be able to identify, and not just after they're 19, but at different intervals as they grow into adulthood, to be able to give feedback, because I think that it would enable them to give consideration to what would be helpful for the future for other kids. And so we do have informal feedback that we get from kids because we have long-term relationships with the kids that have lived in the home, and they'll come and visit. We have an open house every year, which they come to. And during those times, we get feedback about how their life is going, and talk about what would be more helpful, for other kids who live in group homes. And so we get that kind of feedback, but it's not a formal process. And I believe that an exit interview, not just one, but several, would be helpful. I think that in the group homes, we quite often take the parental role on, and we support the kids in that way. And just a movement beyond the parental role, which it's always there, into more of a collaborative process where the kids have more freedom to make decisions, but they have supports there as well. They have opportunities to be independent and not have the same guidelines and rules maybe there is in a home environment. So try to create as best as possible a real life scenario for a kid who grew up in a parental home, and being able to have the freedom to support the kids to whatever they want to do, to be able to teach them things, and we don't formally have that right now. We try to adapt so that we can support kids. Of course, having a formal transition program would be helpful too, and that's something that we're endeavoring to do right now, is to create an actual placement where kids can move from the longer term group homes as younger teenagers into a transition program which focuses more on the things that they need to live and be healthy and happy in the community.
But while there is a way to go, there are some aspects of aging out of care that are working.
Well, the successes is that we so informally we have kids that continually connect with us even after they've moved out. So we're able to support them in the community. We do, I think, a really good job of supporting the kids while they're in the home, developing their skills. We focus on attachment. We focus on the good things that are in their lives and their strengths. And so through that attachment, when they move out, there's a desire for them to connect with us as well as us with them. We have an open door policy where we invite the kids to return and to spend time with us, and they do. And so so beyond aftercare, what we do is we always say that this is your home, and if there's anything you ever need, call us, and they do. And so I think that's that invitation, and the genuine desire to be able to work with the kids. I think that's really helpful. But I think that it's just being conscious, and I think in advance of the age of 19, which is where kids typically move out, is to prepare them as best we can. So spending time working with them to develop skills and connections in the community, knowing that there's some things we can't do, and that when the kids move out, that a lot of it's dependent on them, and when they seek it out with us. Even when you have the invitation, I think sometimes the kids feel like they don't want to burden us, and so it's put on them. And so that's, a further gap is that is not having to rely on the child to reach out to you, but to, as adults and being caregivers to these kids and being parental figures, is having something built in so that we're actually taking the lead. We continue to take the lead. We're making the invitation to them to like a formal invitation for them to be part of a transition plan.
Benji Clethrow has been with the Advocate's office since 2011. She is incredibly passionate about rights for children and youth, so I was excited to interview her.
What we do here at the Advocate Office is work with the youth to find out what their view is and ask the social worker to consider what their view is. And I'm talking about the social worker under Family and Children's Services, but also we work with the Department of Education, with teachers or education assistants, or with youth justice with the probation officers. And so it's a right of the youth under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article number 12, to have their view considered and preference considered in a decision being made that's going to affect their lives. So the Yukon government, the same with the Canadian government, all the acts and legislation are all come under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is a treaty which was developed in 1989 and Canada signed on in 1991. The UN Convention of the Rights of the Child has 42 rights, and I really believe if all the governments and agencies, if we could all uphold the rights of the child, it would resolve a lot of issues for youth today. Because children and youth have access to food, healthcare, standard of living, like all the basic human rights. So if we were all aware of the rights and in our work and made sure the legislation upheld all the rights, there would be a lot less impact on children and youth today, including the ones that have aged out of care. So I meet with a lot of youth that have aged out of care. And it seems to me that a lot of the clients that I've worked with that have aged out of care are intergenerational survivors of residential school. Most of them, not all of them, but a lot of kids when they're First Nations youth may have an intergenerational impact of the residential schools going back maybe now 3 or 4 or 5 generations. And so I really think the residential schools really broke the parenting skills. Like that's how the residential schools were designed, was to break the attachment between the parent and the child. So for parents who don't have a reference to how to provide or to develop a secure attachment for their children, if they're grown up in a home that didn't have any attachment or in a residential school, they don't really have a reference on how to build that attachment if they were never raised with it. So it seems like we have generations of kids now who have grown up that really are suffering because of that. You know, being raised in a group home, you're not developing a secure attachment to your parents because they're not even there, as with group home workers who are not even your family. And it seems like one thing that a lot of kids complain about and will say is what they're really missing is love. They just want to be loved. And when you're living in an institution, you're just being managed. You're not being loved by your parents. And then it just creates a lot of problems for youth because a lot of youth will want to, you always want to go back to your family. Doesn't matter where they are. You want to go back and find them and try to help them or try to fix it. But it's just a natural instinct. So naturally, a lot of kids will want to go home to their family. And what we feel here in the advocate office is that would be more helpful is if there was a lot more support given to the family in the first place, so youth don't have to leave. So youth and children don't have to leave. So if there was supports to help parents to increase their parenting skills, because let's face it, when you went to if people went to residential school, they would have, no parenting skills at all, and they wouldn't have a reference to what that looks like. So if there's a lot of support given to the family so the kids can stay there and they can have a sense of belonging, and then they can start to master a skill. Ideally, you would get that in school, but it seems like youth that are transitioning out of care usually aren't doing really good in school. The impacts for youth that have aged out of care are usually their home life is pretty broken with their family. So that's one of the impacts. If they have no feeling of connection. So someone could actually be living here in Whitehorse and have a lot of family here, and there's no connection. They might just know who their family members are, but they might not even know who they are. And a lot of youth that have aged out of care also have a lot of trauma. So from different things, usually that have happened to them, that's why they came into care, or that may have happened while they're in care. The issues, the trauma needs to be addressed. And A lot of kids would need to feel emotionally safe. I really believe that the government should reconcile a lot of issues in child welfare for Aboriginal children. I really believe that. In the calls to reconciliation, the TRC calls to action, the main 5 calls are about child welfare. And, let's face it, in residential school, when people went to residential school, there was no rights upheld at all. I mean, when, the way kids were treated there. So they have to reconcile all those rights that were broken and not upheld. And there has been a lot of damage done to some kids. And, a long time ago, people had a lot of kids. So some families would have like 10, 11, 12 kids. So the damage wouldn't be just to one kid in one family. You'd have a whole sibling group ranging, over 20 years or 25 years that are severely damaged. And in some big cities, like they had residential schools for 150 years. So that's going to take a lot of reconciliation to go and try to repair the damage from generations of families. So today, some youth are not even aware of all the damage that has been done in their families, because sometimes it is so great, like, it's hard to even comprehend. But I really believe in order to move on and move forward, what we all have to do is we all have to learn how to be aware and accept from where we came. So when I really learned this from a Maori elder is you can't really know where you're going unless you know where you came from. So it's good to just, to go back and find out your family history and to look at it and just accept it for what it is. Because then that can help, to know where you want to move forward. And then on the other side, people have to be prepared to, meet and make, build a relationship with the children that were taken away. And then all the family history, a lot of it's really hard to hear. So there needs to be a lot of social support for things like that. So reconciliation is a process. It's not just one family dinner and everything's going to be great, but it would be a process that would have to be supported in order so it could be successful for everybody involved.
Billie Janine Richard is Bernadette's sister. She came to visit us at the Child and Youth Advocate's office to share her story.
I was given 5 days to move out because there was a younger girl who had moved out. She was with a family, but the family couldn't handle her, so they gave her back. And because I was the oldest person in the group home, they told me they needed my bed because her bed was recently taken by another young lady. So where you're usually supposed to have at least 2 months to move out or to get ready to move out, to prepare, they gave me 5 days. So, and it was in April, the beginning of April. And I was like, well, shit, I'm going to be homeless at the beginning of spring. Also winter, because snow is still feet off the ground. And that was not fun at all. And for the longest time, up until about 2017 is when I first started getting like food AOs and actual help and rent and stuff. But I moved out originally when I was 17. And then I came back. But there's a lot of things that happened around that time. They did help me, they helped me move out or move back to Whitehorse because I kind of took the Greyhound to Winnipeg. But they helped me get back, and then I was living at 5030 for a while. But I still can't believe that it took so long for them to actually start helping me, like financially, or even help me get on my feet, because I was just living with somebody, and I didn't have a job at the time, and I couldn't help out with food. So I was just kind of being a couch potato mooch, and that didn't feel very great, because when I originally moved out, I was going out with somebody who was a lot older than me. So she kind of was like, well, it's not appropriate for you to be living with this person, so we're not going to help you. Instead of, well, we'll help you if you find something better to do with your life than being with this person. I don't know. She went about it super weird, 17 years old. I'm paying my own rent in an apartment. The least you can do is kind of help me with food. I mean, I am a ward of the government until I'm 19 years old. You are my parent, so says the government. But I got nothing up until I was 21. So 18, 19, 4 years that I was out of care that it took for me to actually get help. Sorry. Like, it's pretty shitty when somebody's kind of like assigned to you and they're supposed to be there for your support, they're supposed to be there for your help, and then you get turned away when you need it. And when they're supposed to be your legal guardian, they're supposed to be the people taking care of you and helping you and looking after you, and just, no, whatever. And then when I aged out, I wasn't even 19 yet, but 5 days. That's insane. Like, some people, it takes them 5 days to even pack for a trip, yet alone their entire life that's been in this room for so long. Like, I still have stuff in storage because of when I moved, and I don't even know what I'm going to do with that because I don't have anywhere to put it now. Like, but it's not just like aging out of group homes or anything, and it's like the actual system. Like, and it's not just my social worker as a person, it's the fact that she has people that she has to talk to, and then they decide, and it just gets passed down the line, and then it gets very unpersonalized, and then you're just another case number. You're not even a human being, you're just there. Like, we're just somebody's problem now. Still can't believe that it took so long for them to actually help me. Like, that's why I ended up hitchhiking around and deciding to be homeless rather than staying at group homes, because I just hated having to live underneath my social worker and have her just not really be there. Like, she did better stuff for my sisters because they had the same social worker, but I just definitely didn't feel like I was part of anything. I mean, if Benji shows you those pictures that I did, I've got portraits that I did for my art show. It's the positive and negative feelings of living in care, living in foster care, being homeless, being and feeling pretty much just like you're rejected. Ross over at ISSI is amazing. He's my current like social worker person, and he helps me with whatever he can. Like, when I don't have a job, well, I didn't have a job, he'd go and ask Jane if he could get food AOs, like, and he'd have it for me that day within 15 minutes because he actually wants to try. He actually is like, people who have lived in care for as long as you have, I can't even tell you how long I lived in care for. Like, I was a ward of the government, so I know I was a baby because I talked to a group home worker that worked at the receiving home, like, before it got torn down, the old one, and he was like, I remember you from the old receiving home. I was like, oh yeah. And he's like, I couldn't remember your name. I just knew that there were diapers and there were not diapers, and you were one of the diapers. And I was like, well, that's awesome. just another number. So the system's just really, really messed up and stupid. Some people try, but not as hard as they really should, because they don't have the experience. They haven't been through it. They don't know what it is. They've just gone and taken a class or a course for 2-3 years, and here you're certified to help these people who've been tossed around from home to home to home to home, and just try to get to know them. I don't even know how many social workers I had. There was one social worker that, like, I actually started to like her because she was like, I'm not going anywhere. And then bam, she's like, I'm leaving. And I was like, I give up on social workers because, well, anytime that I even take time to try to get to know one or actually try to trust them on a personal level, especially after you move out, like, you you're out of care, because there's still the extension, because from 19 to 24, you can still get help. You can still have access to services, but it's a lot harder to go and ask for these services when you don't have a personal trust with who was supposed to be your legal guardian. Lonnie is really cool. Lonnie is the best person. He still will help me. He'll still reach out. He actually helped pay for to get my learners renewed, because I was freaking out. My birthday just passed. So it expires on your birthday, and I'm talking to him on the phone, crying. I'm oh, my learners is expiring, and he helped me with that. But you don't really get too much of that. There's a few group home workers that still keep in touch with me and try to help me, but there's not a crazy amount of support. There's just kind of my social worker. Here, 5 days, here's my old phone, so you can keep in touch. But no money for minutes, just an old phone. Yeah, I just wish that there was more that people could do. There's no, transition homes or anything for people that are older that, can't find anywhere to go. Because I don't know how many kids who can't live at the receiving home or group home or anything like that, who can't live there anymore, end up homeless and on the street because there's no further options for them. Nobody actually sat me down and was well, let's do a budget plan. Let's try to find you a job. Let's try to find you an apartment. Let's do a budget plan so you know where your expenses are, because we've helped you find a job. We've helped you find a place, and you're going to be okay after you move out because we've helped you. Instead of just, well, you're aging out, bye. They should definitely put, when they have people that are in long-term care like I was, they should have set plans for their future for when they get older. If I was a baby and, I don't know, around 13, maybe they should have started doing a plan of, hey, when she turns this old, we can start talking to her about this and this and this, because she's not going to be in care within 3 years, instead of just at the last 2 months preparing people to move out. They should be preparing these children to move out and be adults way, way sooner. They should be talking to them about this stuff way, way sooner, instead of just the last 2 months. Because what you absorb in 2 months, you forget it in 8 seconds, because that's the attention span of human beings. That would be beautiful to see social workers and the director of whoever talks down to the social workers, if they would actually come up with some sort of plan to ensure that these kids can learn how to function. And then maybe half of us won't end up on the street or being drunks or drug addicts or anything like that, because it happens. One of my old friends, I see him panhandling on Main Street because he aged out and he has nowhere to go because they didn't prepare him. It's devastating to see that. So definitely that's what I think that they should do, is actually sit down with all of this. Can I swear? All of the fucking social workers, and actually get them to make long-term, because how many kids are in long-term care because social workers have told their parents, oh, get sober. Oh, no, they're ours now. You can't have them back. Because that's what happened to me. My mom got sober, and they were like, oh, no, no. That fucked her up. That completely messed her up. And then we only got to see her 3 times a year. If even. Because she had to be sober for 3 days in a row. And how do you stay sober to see your kids when the people who took your kids told you to get sober, and when you did, you didn't get your kids back? And even preventative measures so kids don't end up in care. So go for the parents who have the kids and they have the problems. Help the parents so they don't end up having kids who end up in the system and end up in the same footsteps. Because they're not going to be prepared if they're just under a social worker. Obviously, as I've said, nobody's going to be doing this whole planning situation because, quite frankly, I don't think the government cares that much. And I think it would cost them too much to even think about it, which is pretty silly. I mean, they can take out all these grants for the stupid circles on the street, but when it comes to kids and the people who are supposed to be leaders of tomorrow, when you're in the system, you don't really matter anymore.
Jennifer, Joe, and I have known each other since we were little and aged out of the same group home, although our stories differ a bit. While her daughter Heaven played upstairs, we talked about her experience.
Well, I know a lot of people go through their good and through their bad growing out of care. Mine are a little different from people because I've been working since I was able to work. I've had a full-time job and my mind was all about the money. So I was able to learn on my own very quickly what to do and how to get there. And I did have some support, but looking back, I realized there wasn't as much support as a youth should have. I feel like they gave me a couple opportunities financially, but if I was not somebody who was working all the time or not used to working all the time, then they might not have that same persistence to go through life and try to find their goal on their own without the proper support. I have seen many situations where I feel like they could have been helped a lot more and prepared for life, because when you're there, you're getting everything handed to you, which is nice sometimes. But then when you have all this, people are cooking for you, people are doing this for you, and then one day you're just thrown out the door, go find an apartment, you got to get a job, you have to do this, and then it's very difficult. So I feel like certain life skills should be taught, but in a fun way, not because they have to be done. I feel like more confidence in being able to approach a job opportunity, those kinds of things like interviews, resume building, should be a huge part in a life skill before moving out, because someone needs to have confidence to enter a job and want the job and be able to get the job. I feel like when you're that age and teenager, your world seems a lot smaller than it actually is, which is something a lot of people told me when I was a teenager and I never believed. But at that point, your world's so small. You don't see past the circle of what could be bigger. So your life is in the moment and only in the moment, and you're trying desperately to do as much as you can to get as far in life as you can, but there's no encouragement. You don't have any encouragement around you, and it becomes like you want to give up. I know that a lot of people while living in care, some of them felt like it was just a paycheck, and then there was other people who went above and beyond and cared and loved for the youth. That I think it was those people that got me farther in life than I think that anyone else could have done, because I had the encouragement going along, and I keep that in the back of my head. And I probably didn't have the best life after I moved out of care, but I pulled through and was able to get by. And my daughter helped me probably about 95% after that. So I had reason to build a good life and succeed in what I wanted for her that I didn't have for myself. I feel from what I've learned from people in care, workers in care, they are told to keep a professional relationship with youth, not to get attached, which does make sense in some weird way, but there's been so much that happened in the time that I lived in care that I'm not proud of and not happy, and I don't have very good memory of. But then I have a lot of good memory of certain workers who went above and beyond and showed love for the youth, that they cared and wanted to see them succeed. They adopted me as like, I felt like one of their own. And it was those people that brought me to where I am today, because I knew that it wasn't just a paycheck for all of them, that they actually cared and they actually wanted to see us succeed, rather than walking in and we were just a child that they had to take care of. They're like a troublesome child, and those people made it hard where I felt like I wanted to give up. But then there was amazing people that those were the people I fought for. And myself, of course. But it's those people who got me as far as I am today. Sorry. Yeah. I'm okay.
So, Carrie, last time we met, I was still in the RCMP, but now I've got my own business. It's called Captain Ken's Adventures.
Retired RCMP officer Ken Putnam and his wife Lana invited me to Infinity House. Because of the recent controversy, I asked Ken what he thought about the criminalization of youth, group homes, and aging out.
I always referred to these places where children were in care as group homes, as did a lot of my colleagues. The key word there being home. It's supposed to be their home. When I first arrived in Whitehorse, I was a watch commander here. I did 34 years in the RCMP. A lot of that time was in smaller communities. A lot of those were First Nations communities. And needless to say, I dealt with a lot of youth. I'm not claiming to be an expert on that, but I did deal with a lot of young people, and a lot of young people who were in trouble. At 16 Klondike Group Home, there was an incident there one night where we got a call. Two of us went over, myself and a female RCMP constable. And we went over there, and the TV had been broken. As I recall it, now this was 10 or 15 years ago now, as I recall it, the young girl was upset over something. Something was thrown, and the TV got broken. The TV was worth $50 at the most. And they wanted her charged. She did get arrested that night, and she was lodged in cells overnight. But she wasn't charged. She wasn't charged with a criminal offense because I simply didn't think it was warranted. There was another incident one night at the Ritz, which is the boys' group home, I believe, where a young kid came back from the downtown area. It was the summertime, and he was drinking a cup of coffee, which apparently was against the rules. The workers told him he can't have the cup of coffee. One thing led to another. The kid got angry. He got grabbed, and he was put on the floor by two of the workers. We got called, and when I got there, they had this young kid pinned to the floor. He's just a little skinny little kid. And I told him to get off of him, and I knelt down beside this kid, and I put my hand on his back and his shoulders, and I asked him if he knew my wife, who was a social worker. And he said that he did. And I said, I'm her husband. And that calmed the kid down. I picked him up and said, stand up, come outside with me. And we went outside, and I called my office, and I specifically asked for a certain other constable to come down who showed up. And I said, take this boy here, calm him down, and go buy him a coffee. The constable said, come on, hop in the car. And this kid jumped in the police car willingly, and off they went. And what struck me about that so much was that young boy was so willing to go with the police, really not knowing what the outcome might be, as opposed to going back inside the group home. I saw a lot of that over the years where society and the police forces and social workers, probation officers essentially throw their hands up in the air and say, what do we do with them next? Well, let's send them to court. Let the courts figure it out. And the courts typically, historically, have done a very poor job of that. So, every single individual that I ever ran into that was deemed to be a criminal was usually there because of the actions of another person who was older than them. And I always compared it to a young person who might live up in Porter Creek or Granger or Copper Ridge. Let's say a 16-year-old girl comes home and she might be a little bit drunk, and she gets into it with her parents and something ends up getting broken. Well, she's at home with her family. If every single father or mother phoned the police every time one of their young children stepped out of line, we would need dozens and dozens of more police in this community. But that doesn't happen because the families where these homes where these young kids live, when they lose control, the family deals with it. Most of my experiences in the group home were not good. Most of the time I had criticism toward the staff. Having said that, I was not there all the time. I was only there when there was problems, and I'm sure that the majority of the workers are good, caring, solid people. However, there are some people that do work in those group homes that should never, ever set foot in a group home again. They're just not cut out for that type of work. Group homes are, it's sad that we have to have them. I know that a lot of kids that are in there because they have done nothing wrong. They're there because they've been abandoned by their families. Some of them are there because, they're out of control at the home that they're in. But we spend millions of dollars operating these group homes. And I think there's got to be a better way, take, an individual person and give them the therapy they need. But, I guess it always comes back to if they're not in their group home, their families abandon them, where are they going to go? Unless you're fortunate enough to be adopted out by some adopted parents. I knew of young people who were turning 18 or 19, and the day after their birthday, it's a handshake and enjoy your life, off you go. Now, I think back in the day when I was still in the RCMP, there would be the occasional visit to that person who had left care, but really not much contact. And from my, perspective, the way of thinking about it, you get somebody who has lived in a group home, which is, they're run like institutions, being told day in and day out exactly what you have to do, and really not, probably not much of an opportunity to make your own decisions. You've got to have, again, the right workers who could, deal with that sort of thing, and giving them the tools. The best tools are the best social workers. You got to pay them properly. You got to get you got to get enough staff so there's no burnout. Huge burnout in the world of social work. And, I'm not going to say that we want to turn the whole community into a community that's governed by social workers, but you need well-trained social workers. If you've got a group home that's majority of First Nation kids, then your social workers should be majority of well-educated First Nations people.
Known to many youth in care as their honorary grandmother is Tresca Gorell, an advocate who has been essential to reviews in the past.
The Anglican report was in 2001.
and it was a report done to look at group homes and the care that kids received in group homes and youth. Jim Anglin was a professor at the University of Victoria, and he came up, I think it was Don Roberts was the Minister of Health and Social Services, and he asked for a review. And so Jim Anglin wanted a committee, committee of local people who would be kind of his advisory. And so I was appointed to that and was involved with it. The big thing that Anglin saw was, though there were a lot of First Nations youth and kids in care, but there were not as many staff that represented First Nations. And I think as he and the advisory committee felt that it is important that kids have connection to their culture. And so his recommendation was, one of his recommendations was that there be a working relationship between First Nations, all 14 of them, and the government of Yukon, who was responsible for kids, so that the kids in care were looked after in a culturally appropriate way. He also, one of his recommendations was to have a child and youth advocate put in place, and it's nice to see that that has happened. So that was a good thing that came out of his report. One of the things that he felt, and I think I totally believe that too, is that a big institution with 6 or 7 kids in it, it becomes a workplace as opposed to a home. And so people obviously need to work, and there will be some situations where you would need a home, a facility where there were workers. But one of the things he recommended was smaller, specialized foster homes where kids would be, or youth would be 1 or 2 in that home, so that they could develop more skills. It would be a more natural type of surrounding. And whether that would be through foster care or maybe kinship care, where another family member would look after them, but it would go through the system, so that the kids got more attention. Obviously, if there's only 1 child in a house, it's going to have more learning opportunities than if there's 6 in a big facility. Another thing he suggested, which I think probably is good, he suggested that each home, where there are more than 1 or 2, have an advisory group, and that advisory group would be a reflection of the community. And those would be people, it would be a volunteer thing, where people would be aware of what was going on in the group home and maybe be able to advocate for the youth. And I'm certainly not saying the staff can't do that, but that they would be people outside the paid system. He also talked about another thing that's in my mind is really important, is that the youth going out of care. And his recommendation was that before youth go out of care, they have 1 to 2 years of semi-independent, independent living. And then they're even followed up for a year afterwards, so that it bridges. I mean, I think back to myself, what did I know at 18 or 19 when I left home? I had to rely on my family to help me from that point on. I didn't know everything. And for youth that are in care, I think many of them are traumatized at one stage or another of their lives. So that trauma makes them even less able to be managing independently. And I give you the example. I have kids who are in their mid-40s, and they still phone for advice, and they still come for lunch. They forget to take their lunch to work. So, I don't know that you can say 1 or 2 years of semi-independent or independent living and 1 year follow-up is good enough. Youth needs to be connected to their families, to their communities, and often they have to create their own families. And one thing I do often see is that, and I do know a few kids who are now in their 30s who went through the system, they tend to create their own families. So they may say, this is my cousin. Well, it may not actually be a cousin, but it's somebody they have decided is a cousin, or an aunt, or a brother, and that may be a very loose connection, but they've been forced to create their own family around them. So I think we all need that sense of belonging, right? And so sometimes it's one has to kind of create that for themselves, which is not easy. So Anglin was very concerned about that transitioning out. What have we done? We're setting these young people free of the system, but are they ready? And so until his report, I don't believe there was the independent living. And again, this is 20 years ago. I don't think that the 1 year aftercare was also in place. Because if we look at some of the statistics, they say that none of our brains are fully developed until our late 20s. And so we're putting kids out when, in fact, they're still developing. And I go back to, if kids have been traumatized in early life, then often that trauma doesn't show up until the teenage years. And so the teenage years are so difficult, and then they're kind of spun around and spit out.
I asked Tresca what the issues are for aging out.
Well, I think, as Anglin had pointed out in his report, there are considerable concerns as far as the kids getting out. Kids who've been traumatized early on, who are having difficulties anyway as youth, and who then are expected to function independently. He had made the recommendation about the 1 or 2 years of independent, semi-independent living and 1 year follow-up. Now, what they have now, I don't know. We're talking nearly 20 years later. I would like to think they have more. In my mind, I would even like to see up to 5 years of follow-up. And it could be follow-up in whatever way suited the youth, right? Not, obviously wouldn't be living in the same institution. It would be, whatever follow-up a youth would need. As I said earlier, I know with my own kids, they're in their 40s and they're still, often asking for information or guidance, or as I did when I was growing up. So I think drugs and alcohol often become an issue. I think in reality, probably suicide sometimes is an issue. I don't think we like to say that, but I think teenagers have a difficult time in the best of circumstances, even in the best family situations. And so there are a lot of difficulties out there. But I think there are success stories too. There are kids who get through it. They're survivors. They struggle, but they do get through. But I think that's why I think that the committee idea of Anglin's, where youth are connected to community so that when they leave care, they're not out on a limb. They have supports. They know where the supports are. Of course, they'd have to want to use them, right? Which maybe in some cases, kids are pretty angry and don't even want to use them. And so it takes whatever time it takes. But I think that's where sometimes the drugs and alcohol can get involved. And it's pretty tough. I mean, my mother never said to me that I'd get thrown out of the house at 18 or 19. And so I can't even imagine how that feels for a young person to know the life I know is going to come to an end and I'm just going to be tossed aside. And in the end, that is what happens. I think that one of the things that I have seen is, that sometimes young women can't cope alone. And so there's a real potential for them to be taken advantage of by often a male person, not always, but so I think it's a very, very, very difficult time for kids, for youth, very difficult. Lots of questions about the past, lots of questions about the future. And I know in the Anglin report there was some concern about kids attending school. And often kids, youth, they don't necessarily want the whole world knowing that they're in care, right? It isn't something that's kind of a badge of honor that I'm in care. So I can see where there's a reluctance to be at school and have your peers knowing that you're in care. In England, when I went over on a holiday and I was talking to a woman there, and she took me to a place where she worked out of it. And what they did there, when kids transitioned out, they would get them an apartment all over town. And of course, this was a bigger city. So the kids found a place to live, and then they would have a central place where the kids could come back during the day. They could do schoolwork, access a computer, they could do their laundry, they could make phone calls, they could do all, so it connected them back. And I thought that model was quite good because the kids had independence. They were somewhere out there and they weren't all glommed together in one place. But they did have a place where they could come back to and connect with people who would know them. I don't know, how, to what age that went, but to me that would be something that would be great to have. I suppose I would like to see a world where we didn't need any of these places, where we don't need group homes, particularly group homes. Young people are our future, so it'd be good to see that there's hope in the future. And I think it's not always easy for young people to see that, but there is. As I say, there are success stories. There are some stories that are not so successful, but there are success stories. So we have to build on those and hope that, as a village, we can look after our young people, whether if the family can do it, that's great. If the family can't, then maybe with support the family can, or the extended family, so that kids know that they do belong and that someone cares.
It is clear that there are many issues with aging out which need to be addressed. But this video is also about solutions. So I asked every interviewee, what is the government's role in ensuring youth have the tools they need to survive and succeed?
That's a challenge, right? Youth may not actually be interested in learning the tools they need to succeed at that moment. That may happen a little bit later. But I don't think government can do it alone. I think that's where they need to have the community involvement, whether it's through advisory, whether it's somewhat through staff. But I think there's lots of connections out there that could be made for youth. And again, bringing people in. I think the government themselves can't do it. They need to do it. What's that saying? It takes a village to raise a child. And I think it takes a number of people to help kids go through. And kids connect maybe to one person or one situation more than others. So it's important to encourage that as well. I know at one point I used to go into one of the group homes as kind of a volunteer granny. I wasn't that old 20 years ago, but still I went as a volunteer granny. And it was really interesting to see. Kids were fairly happy to go out with me, and I had a little dog, and maybe they liked the dog better than me, but they were happy to go out. And when I'd go over, the staff would say, this person is having a really hard day today. Do you want to take them out? I thought that was pretty good. It was, and some of those kids I'm still connected to because it was just a nice situation.
I believe the government's role in ensuring that children and youth have the things they need to succeed is really big. It's just the same as would be a parent. Like if, like your mom and dad's role of making sure that your child is raised and has everything they need in order to be independent and to be able to look after themselves as an adult. So I think the government's role is to help kids to, first they have to meet their basic needs. And part of that can be just the basic living skills like banking, cooking, doing your laundry, managing the budget, getting your identification, your passport, and all those things in case you want to travel.
The other things that would be helpful too, if the youth had a peer support group that they have a connection or bond with some of the youth maybe that were in care with them, or youth that have already aged out, that they have a peer group that they can turn to. I think that would be helpful.
Well, to start off, I feel like that they should be the ones, like, because they took me away from my family, they should be putting me into an environment that's safe and protective. And listen to me when I tell them that it's not. Because it's not always, like a lot of people say, that it's always, who are you going to believe when something comes up, a little 7-year-old kid or this adult who's telling you that they've done nothing wrong. I think also one important thing that might be like useful, because I never got it myself, was to get support from someone. Because like even being in foster care and stuff has definitely affected me emotionally and stuff. So having someone to be able to talk to, like a counselor or someone that I could just like explain everything to, so that I'm not bottling it all up, would have been really helpful for me. Like every once in a while, it was my mom now, she brought me to a counselor when I was younger, but I didn't really know how to explain myself because I'm just a little kid. And when you're little, you don't really know what's going on and how to deal with everything. But even to give support to like the parents that are taking care of you as well, and like teach them how to like deal with the traumatic stuff that these kids are going through, because like they're not going to be like every other kid that's like grows up in a family right from when they're little. They're going to have their history and stuff. And so like teaching the parents how to like go about that stuff.
When children and youth are in care, the government's role is the parent. They are responsible for all parental roles. So when it comes to aging out of care, it is the responsibility of the government to prepare the child to age out of care, and then to make sure that they have access to the supports that they need ongoing. The most recent Child and Family Services Act did extend supports available to age 24, but what we're hearing from young people is it's difficult to engage to access some of those supports, or they feel like they have too many hoops to jump through to access those supports, or they don't know about those supports. So I think part of it is making sure that young people know what they have access to as well. You know, I think all cultures have a coming of age type of milestone, and to me it's a measure of how well we fulfilled our responsibilities as a parent is on how well a young person can move into adulthood.
There are lots of people that should go into work in social services, and those are the damaged and broken people that have been raised in social services, because we know all the lines of you don't care because you're paid for it, but that wouldn't be true because we have the experience. And I don't know, I'd like to see more people that have lived in care get into working in care, so that other kids in care will actually know that people are there for them because they've been through it.
From my own personal observations over the years, that I knew of young people who were turning 18 or 19, and the day after their birthday, it's a handshake and enjoy your life, off you go. Now, I think back in the day when I was still in RCMP, there would be the occasional visit to that person who had left care, but really not much contact. And from my, perspective, the way of thinking about it, you get somebody who has lived in a group home, which is, they're run like institutions, being told day in and day out exactly what you have to do, and really not, probably not much of an opportunity to make your own decisions. There are the rules, like the coffee, you can't drink coffee. If a 17-year-old kid in Porter Creek wants to drink coffee, his parents are probably going to let him and not make a big deal about it. So that's an institutional rule. You've got to have, again, the right workers who could, deal with that sort of thing, and giving them the tools. The best tools are the best social workers. You got to pay them properly. You got to get you got to get enough staff so there's no burnout. Huge burnout in the world of social work. And I'm not going to say that we want to turn the whole community into a community that's governed by social workers, but you need well-trained social workers. If you've got a group home that's majority of First Nation kids, then your social workers should be majority of well-educated First Nations people.
In my opinion, it would just be just following through with things, making sure they have their needs met financially. Maybe the social worker shouldn't be in such a rush to end being their social worker. Just ensuring that there is more aftercare. Just because they leave the receiving home doesn't necessarily mean they don't need any support.
Our role is to ensure that we provide kids what they need, and so it's recognizing their ability and the needs they have, and I think that it's making sure that as the adults in their life, as the parental figures in their lives, that we spend time with them to teach them what they need to know, and that could be cooking, and it could be making those connections in the community of supports that they may need beyond us, ensuring that they know who to reach out to if they need support.
Yeah.
Good job.
I'm gonna touch it.
I have seen better days, been dreaming for some hope. Deep inside, I fight for grace, frustrated with my soul. I've been drowning in these thoughts, too many broken memories. There's a line that we walk, I know there's a remedy.
Needed to be a young father and raise my brothers. There was abuse in my home, it really changed my mother. I'm trailblazing, I fire with determination. They try to put me up, but in my mind is innovation. I could be a calmer stream when I'm relaxing. I could be a daydream and turn into the wildest rappers. I see a bright future with a happy, loving family. Our people still here, still strong, still standing.
The darker the past, the more broken the sun. We're gonna make this path using some hope and some love. My teacher, we'll take life as it comes.
White horse, what's up? Let's have some fun.
This is what it's like growing young.
White horse, what's up? Let's have some fun.
This is what it's like growing young. I just go with the flow. I got so much to get done. My eyes on the future. I got time and I won't run. I am strong in my heart. Our ways have kept me faithful. Because of you, I'm grateful.
They see me as young and dangerous, tough and brainless. What unknown now, but could become the famous. Gotta learn to grow up and trust the basics with responsibilities. Gotta get up and face them. If I knew life would be this way, nothing would seem the same. I see the path that my dreams could make. I protect my love and I keep on saying you never know who I am unless you feel this pain, yeah.
The darker the